I'm Dr. Bryan Wright, and this is Run to the Huddle. Lately, I've been thinking a lot of my father because he's going through some medical things where he needs a lot of help. And it's caused me to reflect on the name of this podcast, Run to the Huddle, and where it all originated. Again, my dad, one of my favorite things about my father is he would take me after school, and because he was a teacher, he would have to grade papers, and he would be working on next week's lessons and all this other stuff. And it gave me time as a young little lad on what I could do with that spare time. So he would take me in Mr. Miyagi style, and he would have me dribble between my legs 1,000 different times. He would have me wrap the ball around my back. And he would I thought he was probably making me just busy so that he could work on what he had to for his job. But in reality, he set me on a path of understanding how important it is to practice something that we want to get great at. And so while I was down in the gym working on different things that he would have me do, there were times where I would get pretty irritated, like, is there any point to this? And just about the time I would get super irritated, he would notice how frustrated I was getting with the same old things over and over again, and he would teach me why he was having me do it. And the way he would teach me is he would bring me into a real life situation with the sport that I was practicing. And I was able to navigate those situations far, far better than I was the week before because of those practices. And he would show me, do you see how you've changed? And it was just like, wow. I really appreciate that I worked hard and I got something out of it. Now, again, he used to teach me to run to the huddle in all of my sports. He would say, wherever you're going, whatever you do it your very best. Do it your very, very best. And it seemed for so many different reasons that if I was doing my very best and others were preserving their energy and were preserving the way that they would walk to the huddle or preserving the way that they would show up after school with practicing all these things, that maybe perhaps I was a foolish one that was over abundantly engaging in these activities. And maybe these guys were the ones that were wise for preserving so much of their energy. And so I was really interested to see that some of my childhood idols in different sports, what they were really capable of and how they showed up. People like Michael Jordan or Bo Jackson, or it would be even as I got older, Kobe Bryant in my younger adult days. And these people were the kind of people that would overabundantly engage. So champions in their own right, all the different people who were champions in their own right. These people were the kind of people that showed up as a 10 out of 10 engagement in all that they did. They were generous in every category. I often like to speak about Jerry Rice, Hall of Famer, San Francisco 49er, Super Bowl winner. He was known for being overabundantly generous. He would show up. He was the type of person that would sprint to the huddle. And these people had one thing in common that I keep on going over, right? They were highly engaged in their craft and highly engaged in life. And that engagement, that definition of an engagement is when we actually show up to do what it is that we are actually signing up for. So if you're preserving your energy for things like, the end of the day, I just want to have enough energy for my family, so I'm going to preserve my energy through my job. So I want to suggest that perhaps you're spending more energy in preserving it than you think. And there's this concept that I really enjoyed from a book called The 10X Rule. This is a Grant Cardone book. He talks about 4 different types of action that you can take. Now, he since in other public speaking opportunities, he since narrowed it down to 3, which I agree with. So I'm only going to share 3 with you, even though the book shares 4. But there's massive action, there's normal action, and there's retreating. Now, of the 3, retreating for a lot of people is the inherent instinct that they get when they want to preserve something. They want to hoard. They want to save what they can and run. They want to try and get themselves to have a surplus in something. So let me get what I've got and leave quickly. Retreating actually has the most negative net effect in energy of the three. Now, there are times when it is good to say, hey, this is no longer a good use of my time and energy. I'm not relating retreating to that particular category. So I don't want to go to extremes here and not acknowledge that there are times when it's good to be done with something that's not healthy and that is toxic for you. I'm referring to retreating in times of difficulty, retreating in times of fear. That kind of energy, that kind of action, what it does is it nets a far more negative overall energy than you can imagine. So this shows up in escapism. Escapism is a tactic people use to deal with triad of tragedy, to deal with guilt, pain, and death. And these all happen to us, right? So when people have to deal with guilt, pain, and death, we oftentimes see people use neuroses. One of those neuroses, which means a type of activity we do in order to cope with life's pressures, one of those negative types of coping things that people do is escapism. And escapism is retreating. It's literally retreating. And so if you look at somebody who's got addictions, those addictions form as a result of trying to get a quick hit of something that makes me feel good despite not putting in the work to actually move it in the right direction. So whether it's drugs or alcohol or whatever else people can use for escapism, it can be Netflix. I mean, there's 1,000 food. There's 1,000 ways people can escape. But retreating is that type of energy. And what it is, it's like a credit card. When you swipe the credit card, you get the immediate hit that you bought something with that credit card for, but then you get to pay back that credit card fee plus interest, and you're actually behind when you do that. So retreating is a form of going backward in more ways than one, right? The other one, normal action, is really what I would associate it with this term mundane. Like you wake up, you fill your cup of coffee, if that's what you do, you put on your tie, just how I envision it. You go to work, you show up with your briefcase, you sit down, you log in, you go to work, 4:59 hits, you close the laptop, you get your briefcase, you walk out. It's of course, that's an extreme example, but normal action is this way of approaching life with I'm going to come in, I'm going to do my job, I'm going to leave. Now, the net effect of that energy is definitely higher than retreat because you're showing up and you're diligently attacking things. And there's no way that I'm going to, I'm not mocking it, I'm not making fun of it. I'm simply saying that type of action level does not have the power to stir man's blood. It doesn't have the power to move you to a place where your true potential can be met. It's like if you're lifting weights and you've been told to do 3 sets of 10 in normal action, when you get to the 10th rep, yeah, it's hard, but you might have 1 or 2 left in the tank. You might have. And what we know about how the human body responds to these 3 different types of action, it shows us a metaphor for how life shows up for us too, right? So if I lift 3 sets of 10, I might be able to maintain my muscle. I might even go slightly backward through sarcopenia and other types of things that happen in the human body. And, I'm doing okay because I'm at least showing up to the gym, but I'm not going to get gains with that. It's only in pushing my body to the point where I'm literally failing on the last repetition, of course, safely, right? You've got to be safe here, but when I get to that 10th rep, if I'm like, I've got 1 more that I can even try in the tank and I get to that last one and I'm pushing, that last rep is the reason we did the first 10. It's that last rep that is the reason that we did the first 10 to begin with. And that's where real change occurs. That's why my dad was telling me to run to the huddle. That's why Michael Jordan showed up early in the morning and late at night. That's why Kobe Bryant did. That's why Darryl Strawberry did. That's why Tiger Woods, all these people who were engaged in their craft. I'm using sports as a metaphor because they're widely known and you can look and see performance based on how they actually showed up and engaged in their craft. In the workplace, whatever you engage in, if it's janitorial work, which I've done for a number of years when I was in college, if it's a CEO of a company, if it's marketing, if it's sales, whatever it is, when you show up as a 10 out of 10 engagement. And when I'm talking engagement, I'm referring to not just what you want to see have happen, not just, oh, I really want to see our numbers improve. I'm really excited about seeing success. I would say that's a counterfeit engagement. I'm talking about enthusiastic engagement. I'm going to put a pin in that just for a minute, come back to enthusiastic engagement. But I want to finish with those three types of actions so that we can wrap that up. The idea of normal action is you're going to still have a net negative as compared to massive action. When we give everything that we have to what we do, we tend to actually gain more energy as a result, right? Over time, that's where things really start to compound. So massive action is a place where I would recommend myself and everybody that has an opportunity to resonate with this to engage in. This is where that enthusiastic engagement is so powerful. Now, the word enthusiasm is fascinating. It literally translates to God within. And so enthusiasm with engagement means that you have this feeling that God is within, right? So whenever I'm checking myself and feeling like I just don't feel enthusiastic, oftentimes the instinct is to think the reason I'm not enthusiastic is because things outside of me are not going the way I want it to, or it's not worth it, or whatever. But even in my most, I'll call them not glamorous jobs, when I chose to show up as a 10 out of 10, and I chose to engage at the highest level for what I was going to do my work in, it made all the difference in the rest of my life, in how I showed up with my kids, and how I showed up with my team members, my friends, in every single category. I remember once working for a company in Logan, and we did plastics for a fitness company. So we did plastics, and frankly, the job was just not something I was terribly passionate about. But every time I showed up, I was going to be the best darn plastic remover of all time. I was going to clip those pieces of plastic as best as I possibly could so there was no debris left over. And as silly as that sounds, it's not like, I can't say that it made a huge difference in how the treadmills were made, but I can say it made a huge difference in how I was made. A huge difference in how I was made. So 10 out of 10 enthusiastic engagement is not just about what you want to see have happen. It's how I actively show up. So that God within feeling of how do I get that feeling? Well, there's a lot of different ways, but I'll tell you this. The leader's engagement is always more than the team's engagement. And you may be tempted to say, well, I've seen teams that actually are more engaged than their leaders. And there are circumstances where that may be short-term true. But sustainably so, it never happens. Because eventually, those people either drop their level of engagement to resonate with where the leader is leading them, or they actually either move the leader out and become leaders themselves, or I'm going to go somewhere else because I want to be led by a leader worth following. So sustainably, a leader's engagement is always higher than the team's engagement. If you feel like your team is engaged at a lower level, if they're a 7 or an 8, as hard as it is, and I've had to come to grips with this myself multiple times, it is not them. It's you as a leader. Now, does that mean that just by increasing your engagement to a 10 out of 10, everybody's going to fall in line? No, that doesn't mean they're going to be drug up there necessarily. But you can assure yourself that if your engagement is not a 10 out of 10, they're not going to be any higher than you as a leader. You can assure yourself of that. So to raise your engagement means that you also give yourself the space and opportunity to attract higher level team members to your team and in your life. Like if you don't like the friends that you're hanging out with, you don't like the people that you're hanging out with, take a look at your level of engagement and increase it. And my recommendation, once again, I set and established this concept of retreat, normal action, massive action. Your ability to show up as a 10 out of 10 is the only thing that makes it worth it. Of course, this is a mildly opinionated, view of myself, but again, I established this because there's this phrase that I often use is make no small plans, for they have not the power to stir man's blood. And in a corollary, make really, really, really big plans, for they have the power to stir man's blood. And big plans in what? Well, again, where'er thou art, do well thy part, right? Whatever it is that you're doing, make big plans in that. So if you're at a factory somewhere and you're clipping plastic, make big plans for how you're going to do that. I used to make these small little mini games when I would step foot on the court. Just back to our sports analogy, I'd step on the court and I would make these little games for myself so I could have that 10 out of 10 engagement. I'm going to let my players score no points. Okay, so then they would score a basket because something happened and I wasn't able to accomplish that goal. Okay, let me reset. What's my new engagement? What am I going to do to show up that way? And it caused me to have a completely different experience. And then when I showed up at work with that same kind of attitude, because it's in the little things that we do, it shows up in everywhere that we go, right? How you do anything is how you do everything. And with that being said, if you can do the small things with a lot of fervency, it matters. Now, of course, tying your shoes with a 10 out of 10 engagement, or there are things that just don't even apply to that. But in your workplace, when you show up with your kids or your family, if that's your situation, in your friendships, if you're going out golfing with your buddies, are you there to tear them down? Or are you there to build them up? Now, you can make fun of your buddies and still build them up, can't you? But I started thinking that way. Like, if I'm going to be on the golf course, is this just about how well I hit the ball and show off to people? No. And in fact, I showed myself that the more that I would engage with my friends to help build them up, if I'd set the intention to do that, I was actually golfing dramatically better in my golf game as a result of that. So how do we increase engagement? How do we get to a 10 out of 10? No, you might have a sliding scale where a 0 is like no clue. A 5 is they're neutral. They're too good to keep on. They're too good to not fire, but they're too bad to keep on staff. You just don't even know where to put them. And a 10 would be like passionate, influencing, defending, teaching, and creating. When you look at that scale, how do I get myself to that passionate, influencing, teaching, defending? Well, there's a few ways that I can share here. The first one is commit to a higher standard. When you commit to a higher standard, instead of just kind of coasting into it, you get to full send. You get a full send, say, instead of me going backward, I'm going into massive action. One such example, somebody was talking to me this last week from my team. She was telling me that she was really bored with cardio. And so she had been talking to AI to see what she could do to improve. And AI came back with an answer: you need to try and actually double your pace. Like, don't just lollygag on the treadmill, like cut your time in half and double your pace. Great advice, by the way. Not always does, AI give the right advice, but in this case, it was like, hey, double your pace and, cut your time in half. So don't do 45 minutes halfway doing it, go full send. And like, surprisingly, it was very interesting for her to do. So my recommendation is commit to a higher standard. Get in there and don't just say, okay, like, here's the standard that I have right now. I just don't feel that engaged. Okay, now one up it then. Don't take it backward. I can't tell you how many times leaders in my company have been like, we're having a hard time meeting the target. Okay, so what do you want to do? Let's take the target backward so that people can meet it. Universally, I can say with a very firm confidence, universally, we do worse and worse and worse when we take the target down. It never gets better. What happens if somebody's having a hard time hitting a target of, say, 55 units per week? Then you go to 57, which sounds like you're trying to, maybe like manipulate or abuse them. But what you're doing is you're saying, okay, so let's really raise our sights to a higher level. And all of a sudden it clicks, like, I can do more than I think I can. Whenever my mentors have done that, what's your target for this year's net worth? I set the target. They're like, you can do better than that. And when I think about it, I'm like, okay, let me go higher. What it does is it actually engages me at a higher level. So this is how you increase engagement. The second thing you can do is commit long-term to developing your team. Commit long-term to developing the team, because as you commit long-term to developing other people, you actually elevate yourselves, because a rising tide raises all ships. So the way we elevate ourselves is by elevating other people. So when I commit long-term to the people that I have stewardship over, it changes the way I show up to them. Instead of trying to get a quick reaction from them, instead of me trying to force something into place, I'm looking at what's going to happen 5-10 years from now if I engage with them right now. you will increase your engagement automatically by looking at improving your team long-term. Another thing that you can do to increase your engagement is to share your values. When you do not fearfully hide your values and instead you share your values that really matter to you, whether it's in the company, you share your company's core values, or in personal life, you share your personal core values. Which, by the way, if you're in a company and your personal core values are not aligned with theirs, there's your clue right there that you're not going to be engaged. You've got to move out of that position. You got to move into a company where your core values align. So hopefully your personal and core values of your organization are the same. Okay, even if you didn't set them in stone, they should be aligned at least. Share those core values. Share those values when you're in meetings. Share those values when you go to pray with your children at night, if that's something that you do. But share those values to increase engagement. Another one, and I'll leave it at this one. There are a lot of ways to increase engagement, but it comes back to sharpening the saw. Find a way to renew yourself consistently. Find yourself in a consistent pattern of renewing yourself. And when you do that, sharpening the saw basically just means that if you're going to be out cutting down trees, you may as well sharpen the saw so that it's sharper, so that you can spend an hour sharpening the saw, 7 hours cutting down instead of 8 hours cutting down. You're going to be far more productive. So exercise, nourish yourself, get proper sleep. Write in your journal, spend time thinking. These are important things that you can do in order to increase your engagement. Get your body to be healthy. You know what? I'm going to share a bonus one just to get to an even 5. Commit to accountability. This is a very difficult thing because we want to be seen as successful. And there are times when we commit to accountability where we have to be brutally honest with ourselves, or others have to be brutally honest to us. And we don't feel like listening to the same spiel. We don't feel like being corrected. When we commit to accountability and we're honest with ourselves about our performance, we can actually understand where we're coming from. That is a place where we can improve and go to a higher place, right? So yeah, shoot for a 10 out of 10 engagement in your life. It's the way that you can actually stir up that amazing power that is within you in order to actually accomplish really magnificent things that you were sent here, that you're placed on this earth for, right? So that 10 out of 10 engagement, that enthusiasm within, that's where real power begins to compound in your life. And that's what I'm hoping for me, my family members, and you as you listen to this.